Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is Build Trust and Resolve Conflicts with Your CE program. And today's webinar is being presented by Julia King-Tamong of Learn, and we're very happy to have Julia with us today. And today's webinar is presented or brought to you by Augusoft. And for those who may be new to Augusoft, we make a software system called Lumens, which is an enrollment management system that's designed specifically for the continuing education industry. Before we get started, just wanted to run through a couple of housekeeping items. First off, we are going to ask a couple of polling questions throughout the course of today's webinar. And so you'll see those questions displayed on your screen, and you'll have about a minute to respond, and then we'll show the answers and then continue on with the presentation. And then, Julie, if you could hit the next slide, please. We are also recording the webinar today, as we do with all of our webinars, and so we'll get the link to the recording up on the website. It takes us about 24 hours to do that, and then we also provide a link to the slide deck as well. So we'll send out an email when that's ready to go. And then finally, we are going to spend some time at the end, or save some time at the end for questions. So if you've got a question that you'd like to ask Julia, if you could just send that in through the questions box on your toolbar, and we'll, as I said, get to those at the end. But feel free to send those questions in as you have them, and then we'll just answer them all at the very end. So with that, I think we're ready to roll, and so I will turn things over to Julia. So Julia, welcome.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning or good afternoon, depending upon where you are. I'm in Portland, Oregon this morning, and it's an absolutely beautiful day outside, and I heard from Chris that it's gorgeous in Minneapolis as well. You're about to get that fantastic weather for those of you on the East Coast. I hope it's not too hot there for you. So I just want to let you know that on this slide there is my email address. It's kingtamong@learn.org. So if you have any questions about today's presentation, go ahead and just shoot me an email, and I'll respond to that through email. And if you need to, we can set a time to make a phone appointment. I'm always happy to do that. We're going to talk about two things today. The first thing that we're going to talk about is conflict at work, and then the second thing that we'll talk about a little bit is trust building at work. So let's begin by talking about conflict. And Chris, let's go ahead and start with poll question number 1.
Alrighty. All right, so the first question should now be up on the screen for everybody, and the question is, how much conflict is in your workplace? And we've got a couple of different answers for you to select. So if you could just go ahead and answer, and then we'll continue on with the presentation.
Of course, different people mean different things when they talk about conflict. What I'm meaning is not just the healthy difference of opinion and diversity of ways of thinking and being, but when productivity at work is actually replaced by discord. So that's really what I'm meaning here when we talk about conflict. And it'll be interesting to see how many people who are tuned in today feel like they've got conflict at work in a way that impedes the actual work itself.
All right, so I think it looks like most everybody's had a chance to respond, so I'm going to go ahead and show the results here.
Okay.
And let me, whoop, I think I just hit the wrong button here, so let me share the responses there. There we go. Sorry, I just hit the wrong button. Here are the responses. So 3% of you said that there's not much conflict at your workplace. 26% said not much. 23% said that there is enough that it occupies quite a bit of my mind space. 29% said that enough that it delays work or erodes work quality. And then 20% said enough that it causes me major stress. So if my math is correct, about almost 70% of you are having some sort of conflict, it looks like.
Yeah, good. Well, then you should tell all your children who are enrolling in college that they should get a degree in communications and a subspecialty in conflict resolution. It sounds like there's work set for the next decade. And that's, of course, why we're here today, because it isn't just a poor workplace that has conflict. Conflict is ubiquitous. Let's talk first now about what the cost of conflict at work is. The first thing, and you referenced this really in the poll, was that it creates low morale in the workplace. Nobody wants to roll out of bed, put on their slippers, and say, oh, great, today I get to go and have an argument with so-and-so, or today I have a meeting with 2 people who never let me speak, or whatever it is. Nobody likes that, and it gets old after a while, and basically the world is full of mostly nice people and mostly people who don't want to hurt other people and certainly don't want to be hurt by other people. So just in general, conflict unchecked drives morale down. The second thing that conflict does is it lowers productivity. So it lowers productivity for a number of reasons. One is that people are not spending time working together. They're spending time working against each other, and so that slows things down and creates unstable work environment. It also lowers productivity because people sit at their desk or on their break or whatever it is and think about the conflict rather than about work. It lowers productivity in the worst of cases because people actually sabotage the work by getting things to each other late or providing incorrect data or saying sort of obfuscating things in meetings, that kind of thing. Lots of reasons that conflict can lower productivity, and probably the most drastic is when conflict causes morale to be so low that stress becomes very high and we see increased absenteeism in the workplace or people coming to work but just not able to focus on the work. Another downside of conflict is that it causes turnover of the very best employees, and this is one of my personal fascinations with conflict in the workplace. If it's left unchecked, then people who have options will leave. And I don't mean if you have an argument that goes on for a month, but if conflict goes on for years, people with options will leave and go to a more healthy workplace, more functional workplace. People who have no options will stay. And so eventually you will create an environment over the course of a decade or so where conflict is just the way business is done and not a very good place to leave and not a place that cream of the crop staff will stay or be attracted to. Conflict also leads to employee burnout. Even managers who are managing a team in conflict can get burned out even if they don't have the conflict themselves. And the burnout really then looks like people isolating, people not able to focus on work, people losing enthusiasm. We see when burnout goes up in a business place, innovation goes down, honest conversations go down, and so learning goes down. And eventually that has impact on the products and services and impact on the relationships with the customer. So everything that we do at work that creates conflict takes away from the joy and the enthusiasm and the creativity and the nourishment of the workplace. Because we all know best case, work can be very nourishing. You go and you meet with other people and you hear thinking that's outside your own box, and people support each other through the ups and downs, and work can be really great. But when any one of the things on this list of 5 happen over a prolonged period of time and unchecked and unacknowledged, then conflict can be quite costly to the bottom line. Let's talk for a minute about what causes conflict at work. People have a lot of different ideas about that. I think the first one is, and I guess in some ways I feel I have a positive spin on conflict, the first source of conflict is that we care about what we're doing. And so in our business, we have people who are very concerned about the vision and the mission, and we have people who are very concerned about the operational end of things, and of course those people may be concerned about both of those things. But wherever we are inside the organization, we really care about what we're doing, but we have a unique view of the organization, its customers, and the needs of the customers. And so because we care, we're often passionate in our communications, and that often results in a kind of hanging on to ideas and an unwillingness to listen deeply to another perspective. And it actually comes from a perfectly good intention of caring about the work. We also care how the work is done. So if you've been doing a job for a long time, you have a sense of how to do the work, and you probably have a pretty strong sense of why the way that you do the work is the best way to do it. If you're new in a workplace, you will often come with ideas from the outside, and you'll see problems in the system, and so your caring will look a little different. You'll push for innovation and new ways for things to be done. But we do have conflict because it makes it, the work is important, and it makes a difference to us how we do things. It's also true now we pour diversity into this situation. Different people do things differently. Some people are rational, linear thinkers. Some people are generative, idea creators. Some people are big picture. Some people are small picture. Some people are kind of loosely organized. Some people are very tightly organized. So we're different in how we do things. There are the lone wolf workers, and there are the workers who love to do everything in a team. And when we throw into that mix of different styles of processing and working, we throw into that mix generational differences, it's pretty easy to see how conflict could arise at work. So conflict in the workplace is totally natural. I think that for the most part, and maybe we could say 2-3% not, but the rest of the conflict we have is a result of the diversity in the workplace. So what we don't want to do ever is clamp down on conflict in such a way that it also diminishes the diversity, the creativity, the innovation in the workplace. Because we need that innovation to thrive. So simple, productive conflict, that is differences of opinions, arguments about, what class we should launch when, or whether or not this new certificate program is the best way to do it, or how much of our stuff should be online. Simple, productive conflict brings us new ways of thinking and being, and it keeps us moving forward, and it keeps us learning. And for heaven's sakes, we're schooled, so we should be doing that. But sometimes it goes amok. And here are some characteristics of when conflict has gone amok. When people are in conflict with each other and they can't manage anymore to separate out the personal, emotional aspects of their differences from the problem-solving part. So I work with some clients. I can think of a group of scientists that I work with who are very passionate about their work. And they all have very strong ideas about technology and about the principles of science and research. And these people just fight like cats and dogs all the time. But the truth is, it's a very kind of energetic, it's not a damaging kind of argument. I call it playing fair, which means that everybody's respectful. They just have strong differences of opinion. So what they're really doing is a kind of very energetic problem solving. But you also know, and I'm sure you've done that with colleagues and friends, it's fun. It's kind of like a good wrestling match. But when people move away from that, and they're not really problem solving anymore, but it's become a personal issue. So when the energy shifts from solving a problem to fixing a person, or damaging a person, or confronting a person, then that's one of the signs that the conflict's kind of gone amok, because that makes us forget that actually we're on the same side. So at work, we're paid to be on the same side. We might have differences of opinion about how we do things, but actually we're paid to be on one team serving a very particular, usually well-defined set of goals, and in our industry that has to do with students and programs and that sort of thing. Really what I look for when I go in to do conflict analysis in a department is, are people fighting fair? And what I mean by that is, are they doing problem solving? Or is this a personal issue? And when it's become a personal issue, not just in a kind of like, well, now my feelings are hurt for 10 minutes, but really like, I'm going to get you and bring you down, then we know that the conflict's really gone amok. When that happens, what we see is that shift from problem solving to defeating the other person, and that is a big time suck at work. So it wastes energy, it wastes time, and it definitely affects the service that we can give on the far end. So what happens when we do that is team members end up spending time resolving issues. Even sometimes they're couched as business issues, but they aren't really business issues. They're personal issues in disguise. And if a conflict gets rolling like that, so that people are forwarding personal agendas at the expense of appropriate business agendas, that's the time when the conflict really can cost a department a lot of time and money. Usually when that happens, what we're seeing is that the conflict is going on and on and on. And some people who have the skill and the ability to do this will just give up on resolving the conflict. And maybe they go back to problem solving, but in a worst case scenario, they go on to ways of kind of passively or more aggressively or assertively getting in each other's way. One of the things that I notice a lot when I go in to do a conflict resolution job is there'll be a lot of label slinging. And you know, that person is this way, and that's just a label applied. They're conservative, they're progressive, they're aggressive, they're whatever it is. And I was in a conflict resolution the other day, just, gosh, it's been less than a week ago, and one of the participants described that label habit as dismissal by definition. And what he said was, he said, somebody labeled me the other day and I didn't feel very good about it. And I've been thinking about it. He said, I spent a couple of days watching in my own behavior, just in my mind. He said, I rarely spoke it out loud, but watching myself label other people. And he said, I found this, and I think this is really true. When we label other people, we concretize them. We freeze frame them. So if somebody is aggressive in a meeting once and it offends our sensibilities in some way, or we feel afraid about that or offended by that, and we say there was such an aggressive person, it's possible then that we take their entire character, their entire being, and we boil it down to aggressive. And all of the other things that they do, which are not related to aggressive, we cease to see. And that's really what he meant by dismissal by definition, that we concretize a person, we boil it down, we objectify it into a label, and then if they were to do something positive, we wouldn't own that. Well, of course, when you're on the receiving end of this very narrow view of yourself, it doesn't feel good, and you feel like you're not being seen because you aren't, and you feel like you're not being heard because you're not, and so people will fight back against that. Once that gets going, it's a hard personal habit to break. And so it's a great exercise. If you've got conflict with somebody, whether it's at work or in your family or students that you work with, whatever it is, you might spend a week just watching for whether or not you do dismissal by definition, whether or not you label people and then see them through the strong filter of that label, and whether or not with a little bit of effort on your side, you might be able to loosen up a little bit. One of the other problems that we see when conflict has gotten a little intractable is that people stop trying to solve their own conflicts and they try to borrow power of other people. In a best case scenario, they go to colleagues and they ask advice and they just basically say, I'm a little bit out of my league here and I'm wondering if you could help me out with this conflict. And that's fine. That's good to do that because different people will have different experience, different perspective, different skill, different training. But it's not so good if you triangulate. And triangulation means that you go to another person and you talk about, so person A goes to person B and they talk about person C with no intention to go back. So what this really is, it's a kind of gossip, and it's a very dysfunctional thing. And what it does is if we had 2 people in conflict, we now have 3 people in conflict. And so it very quickly spreads, a little bit like a virus, and can cause quite a bit of problem, and it takes away from the third person's productive work time. So if somebody triangulates with you in a conflict at work, the best thing to do, I think, in most cases, is to say, I'm happy to talk with you about this. Of course, I'm a colleague, and that's why I'm here. But what I'd like you to do is promise to me that when we're done talking and you feel able, you will go directly back to the person you're having the conflict with and try to resolve it with them. Even if you're in a leadership position, we ought to encourage people to work directly face-to-face. Now, not everybody's able to do that, and particularly in situations of power imbalance or perceived power imbalance. And so when that's the case, what you want to do is get a neutral third-party person in the room and let somebody mediate just a little bit. And that person doesn't need to have mediation training or certification or anything like that, but just bring somebody in who's got a more neutral view, even if it's from another department or something, and have them sit in the room while those 2 people work it out, and have them remind them from time to time if things get a little hot, like we're here to work it out. One of the things that you can do if you're mediating a conflict for people is help them continuously refocus on 2 things. One is what they have in common, that they're both passionate about the work, that they both want the best quality of the work or the best programming, whatever it is. And the second thing is keep them focused on the future. So after 5 or 10 minutes of talking about the past, we want to move those people who are in conflict into talking about the future and staying future focused. Anytime we're hurt in conflict resolution, even in a family argument, what we do is then we tend to reach back into our database of past grievances and put all those onto the table. I had an argument with my 19-year-old daughter the other day. She's a great kid, and we're very much alike, so every once in a while we get into it a little bit. And it was kind of fun. I would say it was definitely in the realm of fighting fair. And we were talking about something that had just happened, and I raised something that had happened a month ago, and she said, you know, Mom, you're right, that's a very important thing, and I'm happy to talk with you about it. But right now, let's stay focused on the thing we originally came to talk about. That was a great lesson for me. All right, what exacerbates conflict? One of the things that can make it worse is to pretend it's not there. So for those of you who are in areas, geographic areas or social culture areas where people tend towards nice, not kind of, I would say, you know, I live on the West Coast where people are pretty out there with their stuff, and we are not known on the West Coast, and I don't think so much either on the East Coast, for being kind of conservative and careful. We're pretty out there with our communication. But in the Midwest and in a lot of other pockets of areas, people are very culturally focused on, I think, kindness and goodness. It's just sort of embedded in the fabric of the culture, and I love it a lot. But the downside of that is that it can lead to a kind of denial around conflict, just like, well, you know, I don't want to hurt anybody. So that's okay in any one conflict if you don't bring something up because you're trying to be nice. But what happens over time is that conflict accumulates. And then people feel like, I've got this problem and I've got that problem. And pretty soon it's just bigger than they can bear. Another thing that will exacerbate conflict is leaders not taking meaningful action. So leaders knowing that there's conflict happening in the department, but not talking about it. And often, again, this comes from a good intention. People not sure of their skills, people not wanting to stir things up, people worried about whether or not they have the leadership skills and ability to pull off a conflict resolution. But when people look up the ladder and they see that there's conflict at their level and the leaders seem to be ignoring it, it doesn't feel good to the people who are in conflict. Same thing for driving it underground or letting it be. And one of the worst things you can do is, and this is actually fairly common, it's the reason I put it on this slide, is a team or a department will try to make a no conflict policy. Gosh, if that worked, everybody who had teenagers would just make a no conflict policy, and teenage would be a groovy time. But that's not how it works, is it? We can say we all want to work on this, and shame on us, we should do better. That's not really going to do it. We actually have to get down and roll in the mud a little bit with each other so that we can get back to a focus on work, which is what we're paid to do and what we go to work to do. I want to talk to you a little bit about one of the most highly researched and I think most interesting theories in conflict theory, and that's something called the attribution theory. The attribution theory says that if I come to work and I'm cranky and I snap at you in a meeting, that I look inside myself and I say, well, you know, I'm taking care of my parents and my son has moved back in. This is not true, by the way, in my case, but my son has moved back in and, you know, I just am really stretched to the limit. So, you know, I should be cut a little bit of slack. So when we have bad behavior, we see the reasoning behind that and we make some sense of ourselves and our behavior as a human being. But when a colleague is in a meeting with us and they snap at us or go on a little tirade with us, we are less likely to stop and to look at their behavior and to say, well, you know, they probably have something that would explain this behavior. Instead, we attribute the conflict behavior to a character flaw. That person is so crabby, so grumpy, so jealous, so aggressive, so antagonistic, whatever it is. And then maybe we do dismissal by labeling. So attribution theory means we can make sense of our own conflicted behavior, but we can't make sense of other people's conflicted behavior, and we just attribute it to a character flaw. I think it's interesting that theory is there and that it's so common, so ubiquitous, that it even has a name, the attribution theory. When I first read it, I can remember maybe it was 15 years ago when I started studying conflict resolution. Oh gosh, maybe it's been 20. I read the attribution theory and I thought, oh, surely I don't do that. That just sounds kind of crazy and small-minded. But I put my mind on watching for a month or so, and I found out actually I did it a lot. And so that was a good learning for me, and maybe you'd like to run that experiment yourself. I want to talk now about some talking tools, and I want to say right up front, you've probably studied or been given somehow through a book or a lecture in a team meeting or something, at least one of these tools. But I want to just refocus you on these because these are some of the oldies and the goodies and some of the ones that we can cover in the half an hour that we have left in this seminar. One thing is that a lot of conflict happens when people don't feel heard. You know how irritating this is. You go home and you're saying to your partner, I had a terrible day at work, and what you're wanting him or her to say is, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Would you like me to make you a glass of sweet tea? But what they say is some problem-solving thing. And you think, oh, and so you say, you know, wow, it was just really a frustrating day. But they just problem-solve again. And you wonder if they're hearing you, your feelings, as a human being. And so what we can do to help people feel heard is we can repeat back what we heard. There's quite a bit of research that says women in Western culture, so all of North America, which I think would include all of our listeners, women in Western culture are fairly attuned to this, and men, although they are empathetic, are less trained to say something back that reflects the feeling tone of the conversation. So if you're a man and you're listening, what you might do is not just repeat back what you heard another man or a woman say, but you might say something also about the feeling. So paraphrasing would be, wow, you know, it must have really been a tough day. Was it all day? You could ask a little question about it. That's also kind of a nice frosting on the cake. Was it all day? Was it part of the day? And it wouldn't hurt to throw a little something in there, you know, must be frustrating or must be a little tired by now. Pure paraphrasing is the thing we do when we say, I think I heard you say, or what I think I heard you say was X, Y, Z. It sounds kind of corny, and sometimes people get tired of it because sometimes it's misused in a way that's kind of phony. But the truth is, when you're not feeling heard, it feels good to have somebody say back to you exactly what you said, even if they quote it word for word. You can always put some diplomatic language on the front of it. You can say, this seems really important to you, and I just want to be sure that I got it right. Or, you know, I'm a little tired and a little distracted, so let me run by you what I think you just said, because I just want to be sure that I've understood you correctly. Try this thing. It sounds a little corny. I think you'll find that it will diminish conflict and that it will help things go in the right direction, even in a place where you're with somebody who's pretty hot-headed. The key to the end of paraphrasing is at the end of it to say, did I get that right? Or was it close? Or did I miss anything? Really asking to the other person, showing to them that you're open to hear about something where you misconstrued it a little bit. And watch their body language when they do that, especially if you're a rung up the ladder from this person, or if you have more personal confidence, power, and self-esteem. Watch their body language, because they might say, yeah, it was okay. That's probably a sign that you missed something. And then I would inquire about that if that's the case, because we don't want to miss things. We want to be sure that people feel heard. There's another communication protocol that I use when conflicts have gotten really intractable and very difficult. And it's not on the slide here, but I'll say it to you so that if you've got a pencil, you could write it down. You could try it if you've got a little something going on at home that's quite difficult. It goes like this. I say back to you what you said, and I ask you, is it right? And you say yeah or no, and if it's not, repeat the whole 9 yards back to you. And we want to really go for accuracy there. And the key to making that phase work is to speak only for about a minute or a minute and a half at a time. It's got to be very short chunks. You try this, it'll crack you up. Somebody will go on for 5 minutes. There is no way that we can repeat back 5 minutes worth of speech. I mean, maybe one person out of 1,000, but not the rest of us. After that, you can make an affirming statement, sometimes called a validating statement. And that really is, I see how you could feel that way. So my business partner and I, who've been working together for 20 years now, trained ourselves in this communication method. So we have a very positive work relationship. But we always say one of the reasons we have such a positive work relationship is because we trained ourselves in this. So if I get hot-headed about something, I'll say, you know, Mike, I think you're not really hearing me. And he'll say, okay, let's do the conversation. He'll say it again, and I'll say exactly what I've said, probably 4 or 5 times at that point. He'll repeat it back, and he'll just say, did I get it right? Even if he thinks he got it totally right, he'll still ask, and he's waiting for me to say yes. The reason he's waiting is that means I'm saying, yeah, I feel like you heard me. Then he'll make the validating statement. The validating statement is for him to say, I see how you could feel that way. He's not saying he agrees. He's not making some hokey, like, I see how a crazy person like you could feel that way. But he's really saying, given what I know about you, given where you sit in the universe, given the perspective that you have, given your generation, your gender, your whatever it is, your job title, that makes sense to me. I can make sense out of that. It's not saying that you agree. And then the third thing is, if we sense that there's a lot of feeling up in the moment, then we could say, we can make a guess at the other person's feeling. And we could say something like, that must be kind of frustrating. Now, a lot of times people will say, well, I don't really want to take a guess at the other person's feeling because it irritates me when people tell me I'm angry and I'm not. But with this, you're saying it in a very soft kind of way. You're taking a stab at it, saying something like, that must be kind of frustrating, or maybe you feel disappointed in that, or well, you know, if I were you, I might be a little angry. If you get it right, the person will say, yeah, I really am frustrated, and that gives them a chance to go on for a minute or 2 or 3 about their feelings. If you get it wrong, if they say something like, if you say, well, you must be really frustrated, if you didn't hit the nail on the head, then they'll say, well, no, I'm not really frustrated. I'm, I guess, disappointed, or and they'll use the airtime and your support to actually get in touch with their own feelings. What's positive about having that person get in touch with their own feelings is they're more likely to let go of them once they feel heard, and once they feel like you understand that they're having some emotional impact. They're more likely to move on in the conversation. You've probably had the experience yourself, and it's a crack up when I watch myself do this, but if you don't feel you're heard and you don't feel the other person has some sense of resonance with your feelings, you'll just repeat the same thing in 100 different ways. So the good thing about one of these paraphrasing tools, whether it's just a simple one of repeating back what you heard and asking you're right, or if you use a more complicated protocol that I just described, the good thing is it'll move the conversation along. Another great protocol, and it's taught in almost all Communication 101 classes, is something called the XYZ protocol, or if you're listening in, one of our friends from Canada, it would be the XYZ protocol. And it goes like this. When you do or say X, whatever it is, I feel, put your emotion in there, and it would be more helpful if you did this other thing. So for example, it might go like this. When I call you at work and say, would you like me to cook dinner tonight? And you say, that would be fantastic, I'll be home at 6. And then you don't come home till 9, I feel disappointed and disrespected. It'd be more helpful to me if you were going to be 3 hours late if you sent me a text message. The earlier the better. So that was the, when you do X, I get this reaction to it, and then you're telling the person what would be better. What I like about this protocol is when you do X, does not include a lot of judgment and a lot of dumping of garbage. So we don't say to somebody, when you interrupt me in a meeting because you don't care, because you have your personal agenda, we're not doing that. This is not an attack. It's just a non-judgmental observation. So when you interrupt me in a meeting, I feel frustrated, disrespected. Now, this is causing me to name and to own my own feelings publicly. I think that's a great thing for an adult at work to do or in a family to do. And then the third step, the Z step, really causes us to have to say what it is a better future would look like, even if the future is 5 minutes from now. So it's very easy in conflicts to get stuck spinning out in descriptions of hurting each other or underperforming or disappointing each other in the past. It's a real step forward in maturity to say, this is what fixed would look like. Now, a slightly more sophisticated version of the XYZ protocol is found from a set of communication tools called nonviolent communication made by a guy named Marshall Rosenberg. And if you have issues with conflict in your life, look up Marshall Rosenberg's work. It's fantastic, and he's famous for what he did in nonviolent communication. You get plenty of free stuff about it online. What he says is when you do X, ideal Y, it would be more helpful if you do Z, and then Rosenberg puts a piece in there that says, would you be able to do that, or are you willing to do that? So what it really acknowledges is that when I'm saying to you it would be helpful, what I'm really doing is making a request. It's not a demand. I am not the queen of the world. I am not Lord over your kingdom, only Lord over mine. And so what I'm really saying is, would you? And I think that that's a nice little piece that Rosenberg put in there, because maybe the person will say, well, I can't text you, but I could call you. My phone doesn't have texting, or I could call you. Or I could text you, but I often don't know. Or no, I'll probably forget to text you because the reason I'm late is because I get caught in work and some crazy thing. Maybe it's better if you call me. Would you be willing to do that? You see how it launches a conversation into a solution? So that's the XYZ protocol. How might it look at work? So we say to somebody, when you commit to having this budget to me on Friday and you don't bring it in until Monday, and I have a meeting Monday at noon and I have to present that budget and I don't get much time to look at it, I feel like we're not being on the same team, and I feel disrespected, and I also feel a little nervous walking into that meeting because I'm unprepared. So it would help me when you commit to a deadline, if you're not going to make the deadline, if you let me know. Or it would help me if you commit to deadlines, say at 48 hours, and then you can procrastinate for 24 and still be on deadline. Something like that. So would you be willing to do that, would be if we put Rosenberg's piece on the end. So that's the XYZ protocol. I think an important protocol and pretty well known and well used, easy to teach. So it's a great one for teams to work on. And you can just have exactly this slide. In fact, you can take this slide. You'll get them after the seminar, and you could blow it up and laminate it and stick it on a flip chart. And when people get hot-headed, you could say, whoa, 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 let's use the XYZ. I want to talk for a minute about one of the most pernicious things to happen in conflict, and that is the problem of blame. In fact, I was in a meeting last year, and somebody said to me, and this cracked me up, well, time to get out the blame throwers. And I thought, yeah, that's kind of how it feels. Like people are sitting around with weapons and they're torching each other with their blame. Here's the problem with blame. Now, what I've done is I've made a systems diagram here. For those of you who studied systems theory, Peter Senge's work, you'll know what this is. But just this is a story. This is a picture of a story, and this particular story is how blame drives a team or a family or a relationship to dysfunction. So we're going to start at the top with blame, and it goes like this. When blame increases, fear increases, because all human beings want to be safe. Nobody wants to be blamed, whether they should be blamed or not. So when blame increases, fear increases. When fear increases, information decreases. You know about that. If when you make a mistake, somebody blames you, then you feel afraid to tell them about your next mistake. And so you don't give them as much information. So when information decreases, learning also decreases. The reason the learning decreases is because we don't have information coming in from all the different points of view in the office, and we need that. Well, guess what? When learning decreases, then mistakes go up, and when mistakes go up, blame goes up. Now, this is called a reinforcing loop. That's why it has the R in the middle there. And what that means is we're looking at something that's a snowball rolling downhill. The more we use blame, the more fear there is, the less information flows back and forth between colleagues in the office, the less learning we have, and therefore the more mistakes we make, so the more opportunities for blame. We have to intervene in that. And the only way to intervene is to find some other tool besides blame to talk about the mistakes that are made in the office. One of my favorite tools is something called contribution. What it means is that we sit around the table in our team and we say, all right, look, we did a class and there were no materials for the class. So that teacher had to go through the first 3 hours of the class without the books, without the handouts, the whole 9 yards. We really screwed up. So to blame would be to say, well, I did this, and you didn't do that. Contribution means you sit around the table, and each person in the room talks about their role in that. And so if you've got 5 people on your team, programmers and operation people or whatever it is, you can each say what your role is. Sometimes your role is very benign, just that you were busy and you weren't paying attention, or that you're the boss of this team and you were sitting in your office with your door closed for the week. And so somebody might have known about it, but maybe you look like you shouldn't be disturbed. So blame always is about judging and looking backwards. And the problem with blaming is there can be holes in the system, but we never get around to talking to them because blame shuts people up. It doesn't get people talking. Talking about contributions gets people talking. It gets the conversation going forward. And so it's also a contribution conversation should eventually roll around to how are we going to prevent this in the future? How are we going to keep this from happening? So it's joint, it's interactive, it's a much looser process than blame. Generally works much better. Sometimes people will say, yeah, I'm a leader on the team and I want to take my contribution, but I'm not sure what it is. Contributions can be subtle stuff like avoiding talking about this problem until right now, or being unapproachable. Sometimes if you're conflict averse, you kind of hide out a little bit, look to people with their voice raised, you just go the other way down the hall. Or sometimes your contribution is what I call a paradigm collision, and by that I mean you do things one way and I do things a different way, and so that clashes. Or sometimes you just have weird assumptions about your own role. I thought you were going to take care of maybe a salesperson at contract training unit, for example, will say, well, I thought operations handled handouts and all those things, and operations thought the same thing about sales, just something like that. All right, another tool, inquiry. Your grandmother did it. It's absolutely fabulous. It's a black belt skill, and it means you don't levy opinions. In a conflict, you just start asking questions. This is one I trained my kids in, and they're now both ace at inquiry. Well, what you do is you're having a hot-headed conversation, and that person will see this is really going nowhere, and so they just start asking questions. Well, and one of the most kind of benign and useful questions is, well, say more about that. Well, if you don't know what else to say, I tell my kids, if you disagree with everything I've said so far, you can soften me up a little by saying, tell me more about that, or say more about that, or give me a few examples of that. But any question, as long as it's not a loaded question, isn't it true that? That's not a real question. All right, biggest thing we want to do in conflict is manage everybody else. The most potent thing we can do is pull it inside and manage ourselves. So we can be triggered by all kinds of stuff. A colleague who looks like your evil twin sister is going to trigger you. One of the things you can do in a conflict is check in and see, am I mad about something that's going on right now in this moment, or is this really about something from the past, 2 weeks ago, 2 years ago, 2 decades ago? One of the things you can check into is, what are you holding on to? I know a friend of mine lived in San Francisco, sold his business, and he didn't want to sell his parking spot. I don't blame him, downtown San Francisco. Woke up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, called me the next day and said, oh my God, I almost ruined a multi-million-dollar deal because I didn't want to give up my parking space. So when you're in conflict, ask yourself, what am I hanging on to? Do I want to hang on to that? Is it really worth it? Sometimes it's a hill you should die on. Sometimes it's not. Another way to manage yourself is to just stop. Just stop and notice, what's going on here? What do I want to go on? What am I doing to get in my own way? Just kind of rest for a second, literally 3-4 seconds. Another one is to make a plan. So you're going to have a difficult conversation with somebody, just determine, I'm just going to ask more questions, or I'm going to use the XYZ and kind of go in like a soldier, be ready. One of the things to be careful about is describing intention. You did that because you don't know why somebody did something. We as human beings have very strong feelings that we know why others do things. But the truth is, we have not a clue. The only way to know is to ask them, and even then, 80-90% accuracy. We talked about the XYZ. If all of that doesn't work, then you can say to the person what's true in that moment, which is, you know what? This is not working for me. This conversation is not working. Can you help? If you have a way that you think would be helpful, say that. But sometimes we don't have a way. So then you just say to the other person, this doesn't feel good. And it's not really going anywhere productive. And I'm just wondering, do you have an idea about what we could do differently? So sometimes a person will do something and it's not very satisfactory. They're snippy 3 times and okay once. You've got to give them some props for the one time that you made forward progress. And so if they said 3 things that irritated you and 1 thing forward, focus on the forward. And say, you know what, it really helped me when you whatever, when you asked me my feelings, or when you, whatever they did that helps you. Because whatever it is we give appreciation for is the thing that's most likely to be done again. All right, let's talk for a minute about working agreements. Working agreements are just when a team sits down and they have a conversation whose focus is what does each member need to feel safe and productive. The productive piece is what we're paid for, and the safe is an acknowledgement that as human beings, if we're not safe, we aren't productive. And so we just get 4 or 5 team rules. Maybe it's coming on time during meetings. Maybe it's don't interrupt. Maybe it's keep your commitments to other staff members. If you say you're going to get something done, get it done. If you don't do that, call them up and say what. Get those working agreements on a flip chart. Put them on the board. When somebody on the team doesn't follow a working agreement, come back and say, hey, Tom, you bought into these working agreements and we were counting on you. You said you'd come to meetings on time. You're 20 minutes late. But we know that there's maybe a reason for that. So we just want to ask, what's up? And you might say, you know, I had another meeting. I just couldn't get out. It was with the vice presidents. I just couldn't make it. Yeah, you say, okay, we get it. But let's remember our rule. So having that posted in a room makes it easier for team members to say, what we're doing right now doesn't feel good because we had an agreement to not interrupt each other. And now we're interrupting. Doesn't feel good. So let's go back to our agreement. Takes the emphasis away from an individual's negative behavior and puts it on agreements. All right, Chris, you got a poll question number 2 for us?
Yep. Thanks, Julia. So the next question on your screen is, have you ever been in a work group that has used working agreements? And just give you a little time here to respond, and then we'll show the results and finish up here with Julia. And just wanted to remind people, too, if you've got any questions, to please send those in through the questions box on the toolbar, and we'll leave a little time here at the end to answer your questions.
We'd love to have some questions, you know, and conflict questions can be about work. You can even ask things that are going on in your family, because the skills and the methods of conflict resolution are really the same. Human beings in family, human beings at work, human beings in volunteer groups, doesn't matter. Principles will be the same. Got an answer for us, Chris?
Yep. Let's see what we got here. So where did the results just go? There we go. 36% said no, they have not used working agreements or worked in a group that uses working agreements, and 36% said yes, and 64% said no.
Wow, this is a fantastic tool. Maybe we should do a webinar, Chris, on how to construct working agreements, because
good idea.
It's a great tool. I use them a lot when I facilitate, and it's fantastic to do it before a group is in conflict. But even a group that's in conflict, even with families, we can do working agreements, and they often will help us get out of a stuck place. All right, let's talk a little bit about trust, and then we're going to take some questions. I'm borrowing now from Ken Blanchard, who has a fantastic series of programs on trust, and I really like his ABCD. He says that trust building with both staff and clients really has to do with 4 things. That the behaviors of trust, so people are not trust, behaviors are trustworthy. The first one is able. We trust people who demonstrate competence through their knowledge and skills. We trust people who can facilitate the work of others. That would be a leadership quality, right? And so when people are able, by that definition, and all of that implies, then we trust them. When we are able, when we show our competence through our knowledge and skills and ability to facilitate work, then others will trust us. You don't dare lean on a fence. It's rickety, right? It might fall down. Same thing with colleagues. Believable refers to people's honesty, their values, their fair process. So, of course, we trust people who are believable, and believable means we also believe that they speak the truth, and so that's where the fair process comes in, that if people say everybody will be given a voice in this meeting, that they really come through. Everybody gets a voice. Connected is the third behavior of trust. Connected means that you have a people focus. And one of the primary sort of core behaviors of having a people focus is we communicate. I can tell you this, the more that there's conflict, the more you need to communicate. One of the things that I teach a lot about is change management, and one of the things I know about that is one of the most important things that you can do is communicate, communicate, communicate. I tell my clients by a factor of 10 over normal communication. When you're in a lot of change or a lot of transition, that's how much you should communicate. But people focus really is just our effort to get out from under our own work and outside of our own shell and relate to everybody, and with a little bit of equanimity, not just the people like us. We're expected as professionals to have some diversity skills and to relate across generation, across gender, across cultural divide, religious divide, all those things, across ways of being and thinking and processing and working. And then the final trust-building behavior is dependable. So of course people trust you more if you're reliable and if you're accountable, and one of the key skill sets holding that up is your ability to be organized. So one of the things that you can do after this webinar is over is sit for 5 or 10 minutes and ask yourself, you know, on a scale of 1 to 5, do I demonstrate able, believable, connected, dependable? Not just that you have it, because you could be connected, but if you're a shy person and you feel your relationships with other people, but you don't demonstrate it, then no one will feel that you're connected. And so all of us have some work to do somewhere in that quadrant of 4 things. All righty, well, you know, if you've had a seminar with me before, what I always say is you ought to take a few minutes after the seminar and write down 3 things that you could do differently. Lots of research to show that even if you write down the list of 3 and drop it in the trash immediately thereafter, you're more likely to accomplish some or all of the things on that list than if you didn't write it at all. If you have questions about anything that we covered today, there's my email, and you'll be getting the slides from Chris. And then we're going to check in for just a minute with Chris and see if anybody had any questions today.
All right, thanks, Julia. We do have a couple of questions that have come in, and just wanted to let people know if you've got any last-minute questions, send those in, and we'll get to as many as we can here. One question is, what do you recommend can be done to keep all this conflict resolution work top of mind?
Isn't that a great question? I really am glad that you said that, because the biggest obstacle to implementing any of this stuff is remembering that you wanted to implement it. It's kind of like me. I'm always on a diet, and I'm always halfway through, you know, bowl of ice cream, and I forget that I'm on the diet. So great question, applies to all skill sets. I think small things. A team can decide that they're going to work on one thing, or you can decide that you're going to work on one thing, like XYZ. You can put a yellow sticky on your computer monitor if that's where you mostly hang out that just says XYZ. Nobody else needs to know what it is. Sometimes people will have a day timer, and they can put an appointment with themselves at 8 o'clock to 8:03, and that appointment just transfers forward every day on your computer. It's a standing appointment with yourself, and it just has a single sentence about what it is that you're working about. Some of the teams that I've worked with trying to build better team skills will take literally the first 5 minutes to check in and see, did you get a chance to use the skill? How did it go? This should be a very brief check-in. Otherwise, people won't want to do it. But very brief, 5 minutes, 10 minutes max, but you want to do it every single time, even if you say, nope, nobody tried to use it. Well, one thing is we need to get better on that. Some of the colleagues that I have very fancy, elegant solutions to this. They go to a store that sells little frames or stands, and they make a beautiful little card in their computer, and they put down whatever it is they're working on, and then it's pasted in the mirror in the men's and women's restroom. They've got it on the visor of their car. All of those things are great. What most people will say is something will work for about a month, and then I need to change it. Got another question, Chris?
Yeah, I've got actually 2 questions here that are pretty similar. What if one person is willing to try and utilize conflict management strategies, but the other person is unwilling or unable to communicate more openly and effectively? Or kind of the second part of the question is, what if one team member refuses to participate in the team or team activities?
Yeah, I think this is a couple of things can happen here. One is, I like to think about it like this, and I don't mean to be too Pollyanna here, but I really believe this in my life. I believe that all human beings want 2 things in common. So they want many things, but 2 things that we all share is everybody wants to be safe and everybody wants to be happy. And I think that when people don't participate, it's because they have a twisted idea about what's going to make them happy, or more usually, they feel not safe to do it. And that can be for all kinds of reasons that we won't be able to unpack here in 5 minutes. But really all you can do is go forward to meet them and make sure that they feel safe. So I think you can ask people directly, is there anything that I could do that would support you to participate? Is there any portion of these things, any one of these things that you could do? Could you do any one of these things if we had someone else in the room to make it feel more fair or more balanced for you? I don't think, unfortunately, in the way that our schools are set up, that it's very easy. If you get a person on a team and they just withdraw and they refuse to participate, there's not much we can do. I mean, you really would have to have a process from removing that person from their position. But I think constant encouragement and any little forward momentum. If they even make a suggestion and they comment about the way somebody else participated, you could say, it's so nice to have your engagement, or it's so nice to have your involvement, or thank you for participating, or really glad that you chimed in this morning. But just really, sometimes I work with kids on this stuff, and I call that watering the seeds. Like if somebody plants a little seed, it won't go anywhere unless it has a little bit of water and a little bit of light. It's not bad for us as adults to remember too. So I think to stay focused on what is happening, to stay focused on the future, to get the person in private and to say, is there anything we could do for you to participate? People have all kinds of stuff going on in their lives. And in one way, okay, it's not our responsibility they're suffering, but also I like to put my mind on that because it extends my patience and allows me to move past my own frustration. I find if we just return, withdraw on negativity with negativity, we actually poison ourselves. Not so functional, not so fun. And then just to accept a very small percentage of people, 1%, 2%, for whatever reason, can't participate. And in that, what I would try to do, I would then pull back power the only place it can go, which is inside yourself, and resolve inside yourself not to alienate that person. If they're already a person who withdraws, the last thing they need is to be alienated, right? That is not the medicine that will cure their disease. Chris, any more?
Oh, yep, we've got a couple more here that we can finish up.
Sure.
In regards to the four pillars of building trust, I find that someone can be very competent, people-focused, etc., but the train jumps the track around believability. How do you hold someone accountable in that area?
Well, I think you hold them accountable by, if you feel they are not honest or they don't have fair processes, you have to put it on the table. You have to say, you can't attack honesty as a matter of opinion. Someone's dishonest because their opinion disagrees with you, but fair process. Say specifically what it was that didn't work for you about the process. And like we didn't hear from half the people on the team, you railroaded the meeting. Or you said we could all decide and then you got frustrated and decided yourself. Say exactly what it is. Use the XYZ. When you did this, I had what? I felt it was unfair, or it made it hard to feel that you were credible in that moment. What would work better for me is, and go for the what would work better.
Okay, I've got a few more questions here. Has the XYZ process ever seemed to increase conflict rather than diminish it in your experience?
Oh, I think very rarely. When it decreases conflict is when people are trying to use it because it was mandated to them and they don't actually want to use it. And then I would go back to just, if it's not working and it's increasing conflict, one of two things I look for when I'm facilitating and that happens. One is, are people really using the XYZ formula to stick it to somebody, which you can, by asking loaded questions or by putting judgment in the X part, or are they using the XYZ and it's not, they're just not able to grasp onto the tool and use it. And if that's the case, then what I want to do is, as the facilitator of the conversation, I want to say, okay, just give me your unbiased story. What happened? What was your experience? And somebody else will say, that's not true. And I say, no, it has to be true. They're talking about their own experience. So it doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean I'd say it's true. But just talk about what happened from your perspective. And then I would talk about, so when that happened, how did it feel? And then, you know, and I'd let the other side talk in between, and then at the end I'd say, you know, so what would you like it to look like? What would fixed look like? Which is one of my favorite conflict resolution questions, because because it's absolutely shocking how often people have no idea what fixed would look like.
Mm-hmm. All right, a couple more questions here. I work with someone who is out to get me. What can I do to resolve this if the other person is not willing or is too angry? I used to work with this person and now have her old staff, and she's angry and retaliatory. What can I do?
Yeah. Well, I think the question is, do you want to fix it? And do you think that it's possible to fix it? I would spend some time pondering that, and it would be great if you can, but it may be, too much to add into the mix at the moment. But I would get the person aside, and I would say, I'd like to have a conversation. Is now a good time? And I would make it a private place, and I would just say, just X, Y, Z. I thought this thing's going on. I'd make it very short. Give yourself maximum 2.5 minutes. So you're going to have to practice it. You're going to have to write it down. When these things happen, it doesn't feel good to me. And I'm wondering if we could find a better way. I'm wondering if actually, rather than kind of in veiled ways, if you would like an opportunity to give me very direct feedback and then be ready, you might want to have somebody who's skilled at conflict resolution in the room with you at the time. And don't cling to outcome. Having made the container was a really good thing for you to do. Whether or not the other person can use it, well, that's, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
All right, we got one question here, so we'll ask that and wrap things up, I think, since we're getting close to time.
All right.
The problem in our office is that conflict is caused by gossip and criticism in the workplace. Could you comment on gossip and how to control the problem?
Yeah. I think gossip is something that a team has to put up on the table and say, you know what, gossip is a form of poison, and when you gossip, you poison yourself. You're the first one to be poisoned. It's interesting. I just did this with a group, and they were very reticent to put it up on the table because it's basically a group of nice people, but boy, had they gotten into an intractable gossip habit. And what I said was, the first thing they wanted to know was, what's the definition of gossip? And I said, what if it was discussing somebody who's not in the room? And people said, oh my gosh, we do that all the time. It's so radical. But we kind of even considered that that might be possible. People then said, we're going to try, just for a week, we're going to try to not gossip and see what happens. It was a fabulous experiment. So I would recommend that. I would recommend putting it on the table. I would recommend saying that you aspire to something better. I would recommend an experiment where people agree when somebody gossips. Gossip's a habit, and it's not deadly. So if someone says to you, hey, so-and-so, I'm so tired of it, you can say, oh, you know what, we're in a one-week experiment. I hate to cut you off, but gotta. And then you come back together in a week and you talk about that. So how'd that go, that gossip experiment? So whoever asked that question, if you want to know more about how to launch that experiment, you can make a phone appointment with me if you give me a little email, okay? It was a great seminar today, and I really appreciate it. And Chris, I appreciate your help, too.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. So just wanted to thank everybody for taking the time to sign in today. And as Julia mentioned, if you're wanting to follow up with her, I think if you go to the last slide, there's contact information for Julia on the slide. And feel free to reach out to her. And then if you also have any interest in learning more about Augusoft and Lumens, there's contact information there in terms of how you can contact us. So again, thanks, Julia. A fantastic presentation. And with that, I think we will sign off. So have a great day, everybody.
Great day. Bye-bye.
I know.